having inspired some of the most important developments in human history, including the invention of the wheel, the building of the earliest cities, and the development of written cursive script. 64. Similar pre-civilized Neolithic revolutions also began independently from 7000 BCE in northwestern South America, the Carol's-Hube civilization, 65, and in Mesomercia. 66. The Black Sea area served as a cradle of European civilization. The site of Sinitsata, a prehistoric fortified, walled, stone settlement, prehistoric city, 5500-4200 BCE, is believed by some archaeologists to be the oldest known town in present-day Europe. 67, 68, 69, 70. The 8.2 kiloyear arid event and the 5.9 kiloyear interpluvial saw the drying out of semi-arid regions and spread of deserts. 71. This climate change shifted the cost-benefit ratio of endemic violence between communities, which saw the abandonment of unwalled village communities and the appearance of walled cities, seen by some as a characteristic of early civilizations. 72. The ruins of Mesomercian City awakened this urban revolution, a term introduced by Child in the 1930s from the 4th millennium BCE. 73. Marked the beginning of the accumulation of transferable economic surpluses, which helped economies and cities develop. Urban revolutions were associated with the state monopoly of violence, the appearance of a warrior, or soldier, class and endemic warfare, a state of continual or frequent warfare, the rapid development of hierarchies, and the use of human sacrifice. 74, 75. The civilized urban revolution in turn was dependent upon the development of sedentism, the domestication of grains, plants and animals, the permanence of settlements and development of lifestyles that facilitated economies of scale and accumulation of surplus production by particular social sectors. The transition from complex cultures to civilizations, while still disputed, seems to be associated with the development of state structures, in which power was further monopolized by an elite ruling class. 76. Who practiced human sacrifice. 77. Towards the end of the Neolithic period, various elitist Chalcolithic civilizations began to rise in various cradles from around 3600 BCE, beginning with Mesopotamia, expanding into large-scale kingdoms and empires in the course of the Bronze Age, Akkadian Empire, Indus Valley Civilization, Old Kingdom of Egypt, Neo-Sumerian Empire, Middle Assyrian Empire, Babylonian Empire, Hittite Empire, and to some degree the territorial expansions of the Elamites, Hurrians, Amorites and Ibla. Outside the Old World, a later development took place independently in the pre-Columbian Americas. Urbanization in the North Chico civilization in coastal Peru emerged about 3200 BCE. Winking Sad Smiley. 78. The oldest known Mayan city, located in Guatemala, dates to about 750 BCE. 79, and Chichihuacan in Mexico was one of the largest cities in the world in 350 CE, with a population of about 125,000. 80, Axial Age. The Bronze Age collapse was followed by the Iron Age around 1200 BCE, during which a number of new civilizations emerged, culminating in a period from the 8th to the 3rd century BCE which Carl Jasperstam, the Axial Age, presented as a critical transitional phase leading to classical civilization. 81. Modernity. A major technological and cultural transition to modernity began approximately 1500 CE in Western Europe, and from this beginning new approaches to science and law spread rapidly around the world, incorporating earlier cultures into the technological and industrial society of the present. 77, 82, Fall of civilizations. Civilizations are traditionally understood as ending in one of two ways, either through incorporation into an ever-expanding civilization, for example as ancient Egypt was incorporated into Hellenistic Greek, and subsequently Roman civilizations, or by collapsing and reverting to a simpler form of living, as happens in so-called Dark Ages. 83. There have been many explanations put forward for the collapse of civilization. Some focus on historical examples, and others on general theory. Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah influenced theories of the analysis, growth, and decline of the Islamic civilization. 84. He suggested repeated invasions from nomadic peoples limited development and led to social collapse. Edward Gibbon's work The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is a well-known and detailed analysis of the fall of Roman civilization. Gibbon suggested the final act of the collapse of Rome was the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 CE. For Gibbon, the decline of Rome was the natural and inevitable effect of immoderate greatness. Prosperity ripened the principle of decay. The cause of the destruction multiplied with the extent of conquest, and, as soon as time or accident had removed the artificial supports, the stupendous fabric yielded to the pressure of its own weight. The story of the UN is simple and obvious, and instead of inquiring why the Roman Empire was destroyed, we should rather be surprised that it has subsisted for so long. 85. Theodore Mommsen in his History of Rome suggested Rome collapsed with the collapse of Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, and he also tended towards a biological analogy of genesis, growth, senescence, collapse and decay. Oswald Spengler, in his Decline of the West, rejected Petrarch's chronological division, and suggested that there had been only 8 mature civilizations. Growing cultures, he argued. Barbarian invasions played an important role in the fall of the Roman Empire. Tend to develop into imperialistic civilizations, which expand and ultimately collapse, with democratic forms of government ushering in plutocracy and ultimately imperialism. Arnold J. Toynbee in his A Study of History suggested that there had been a much larger number of civilizations, including a small number of arrested civilizations, and that all civilizations tended to go through the cycle identified by Mommsen. The cause of fall of a civilization occurred when a cultural elite became a parasitic elite, leading to the rise of internal and external proletariats. Joseph Tainter in The Collapse of Complex Societies suggested that there were diminishing returns to complexity, due to which, as states achieved a maximum permissible complexity, they would decline when further increases actually produced a negative return. Tainter suggested that Rome achieved this figure in the 2nd century CE. Jared Diamond in his 2005 book Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed suggests 5 major reasons for the collapse of 41 studied cultures: environmental damage such as deforestation and soil erosion, climate change, dependence upon long-distance trade for needed resources, increasing levels of internal and external violence, such as war invasion, and societal responses to internal and environmental problems. Peter Turchin in his Historical Dynamics and Andrei Koroteevich al. in their Introduction to Social Macrodynamics, Secular Cycles, and Millennial Trends suggest a number of mathematical models describing collapse of agrarian civilizations. For example, the basic logic of Turchin's fiscal demographic model can be outlined as follows. During the initial phase of a socio-demographic cycle, we observe a relatively high levels of per capita production and consumption, which leads not only to relatively high population growth rates, but also to relatively high rates of surplus production. As a result, during this phase the population can afford to pay taxes without great problems. The taxes are quite easily collectible, and the population growth is accompanied by the growth of state revenues. During the intermediate phase, the increasing population growth leads to the decrease of per capita production and consumption levels, it becomes more and more difficult to collect taxes, and state revenues stop growing, whereas the state expenditures grow due to the growth of the population controlled by the state. As a result, during this phase the state starts experiencing considerable fiscal problems. During the final per-collapse phases, the overpopulation leads to further decrease of per capita production. The surplus production further decreases, state revenues shrink, but the state needs more and more resources to control the growing, though with lower and lower rates, population. Eventually this leads to famines, epidemics, state breakdown, and demographic and civilization collapse. 86, 87. Peter Heather argues in his book The Fall of the Roman Empire, A New History of Rome and Barbarians, 88, that this civilization did not end for moral or economic reasons, but because centuries of contact with barbarians across the frontier generated its own nemesis, making them a more sophisticated and dangerous adversary. The fact that Rome needed to generate ever greater revenues to equip and re-equip armies that were for the first time repeatedly defeated in the field, led to the dismemberment of the empire. Although Thay's argument is specific to Rome, it can also be applied to the Asiatic Empire of the Egyptians, Toth Han and Tang dynasties of China, to the Muslim Abbasid Caliphate and others. Brian Ward Perkins, in his book The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization, 89, argues from mostly archaeological evidence that the collapse of Roman civilization in Western Europe had deleterious impacts on the living standards of the population, unlike some historians who downplay this. The collapse of complex society meant that even basic plumbing for the elite disappeared from the continent for 1,000 years. Similar impacts have been postulated for the Dark Age after the Late Bronze Age collapse in the Eastern Mediterranean, the collapse of the Maya, on Easter Island and elsewhere. Arthur Demarest argues in Ancient Maya, The Rise and Fall of a Rainforest Civilization, 90, using a holistic perspective to the most recent evidence from archaeology, paleoecology, and epigraphy, that no one explanation is sufficient, but that a series of erratic, complex events including loss of soil fertility, drought and rising levels of internal and external violence led to disintegration of the courts of Mayan kingdoms, which began a spiral of decline and decay. He argues that the collapse of the Maya has lessons for civilization today. Jeffrey McNeely has recently suggested that a review of historical evidence shows that past civilizations have tended to overexploit their forests, and that such abuse of important resources has been a significant factor in the decline of the overexploiting society. 91. Thomas Homer Dixon considers the fall in the energy return on investments. The energy expended to energy yield ratio is central to limiting the survival of civilizations. The degree of social complexity is associated strongly, he suggests, with the amount of disposable energy environmental, economic and technological systems allow. When this amount decreases, civilizations either have to access new energy sources or collapse. 92. Felix Konieczny in his work on the plurality of civilizations calls his study the science one civilizations. He asserts that civilizations fall not because they must or there exists some cyclical or abiological lifespan, and that there still exist two ancient civilizations, Brahmin, Hindu and Chinese, which are not ready to fall any time soon. Konieczny claimed that civilizations cannot be mixed into hybrids. An inferior civilization, when given equal rights within a highly developed civilization, will overcome it. One of Konieczny's claims in his Studium Civilizations is that a person cannot be civilized in two or more ways without falling into what he calls an uncivilized state, as in abnormal. He also stated that when two or more civilizations exist next to one another, and as long as they are vital, they will be in an existential combat, imposing its own method of organizing social life upon the other. 93. Absorbing alien method of organizing social life that is civilization and giving it equal rights yields a process of decay and decomposition. Future. A world map of major civilizations according to the political hypothesis Clash of Civilizations by Samuel P. Huntington. According to political scientist Samuel P. Huntington, the 21st century will be characterized by a clash of civilizations, 48, which he believes will replace the conflicts between nation-states and ideologies that were prominent in the